Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of Packers Unscripted. From Packers.com, I am Mike Spofford, joined once again by my trusted colleague, Weston Hodkowitz. We're coming to you here from our studios at Lambeau Field. And Wes, Packers training camp is underway. There is one practice in the books. As soon as we get this show recorded, we're headed out for the second practice of training camp. But I'm just going to start with, how you doing, my friend?
I'm doing all right. It's funny to me that we blink and we're always back.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem like it was already over a month ago that you and I kind of signed off for the summer to go about our vacations.
At the end of
PTO
mini camp, yeah.
And we just find our way back here. But the thing that also is hilarious about that, how things can change. Macro level, micro level, the small dominoes that fall in a 53, 90-man roster. And certainly probably one of the more newsier days, I think, that I've ever experienced in terms of the first day of training camp for the Green Bay Packers.
Yeah, well, two things I want to try to accomplish with this show before we shuffle off for practice number 2. One is to review what happened in practice 1, but also then to look at things a little bit bigger picture, kind of the overview, a training camp preview, if you will. But in terms of day 1, the biggest news, without question, is that the Packers have not finalized a new contract for quarterback Jordan Love yet. Everybody seems optimistic that the finish line is in sight, that it's there. It could happen perhaps any day now. But until that happens, until it is signed, sealed, and delivered, Jordan Love will not be practicing. He has reported for training camp. He is going through the meetings and all the other camp activities except for practicing. He's basically eliminating his injury risk until the new contract is finished. So that meant on day 1, Sean Clifford and Michael Pratt were running the offense, and Sean Clifford was the guy with the first-team unit.
Yeah, and it was fun watching Sean work out there. I mean, this is a guy that I thought put together a really strong preseason last year. Now, again, everybody was sort of deferring to Love throughout that process because they wanted him to get as many first-team reps. They wanted him to get as much preseason work as he could going into his first year as a starter. But Clifford ended up taking and really running with that number 2 job to the point it wasn't even very much a competition. This year, he's going to get pushed more with Michael Pratt coming in. Both of these guys, you look at their backgrounds, very similar in terms of playing a lot of college football at different levels. Obviously, Penn State for Clifford and Tulane for Pratt. But I thought, for how things ended for Clifford, I'm sure that wasn't a great taste to have the 3 interceptions by Zane Anderson at the end of the mini camp. You have to go into the summer kind of, marinating on that a little bit. But he came back, he took charge, he's a natural-born leader. I love the way he started the red zone period. As Matt LaFleur said, with the tighter constraints with the practice schedule, this ramp-up period, they have to be very careful with what they do to get everything in, so they focused a lot on the red zone. He opens it up, a nice pass right to Dontavian Wicks near the pylon. Keyshawn Nixon didn't even have a shot at it just based on where the ball was placed.
And it wasn't bad coverage necessarily.
It was good coverage.
It was just a good play.
But when you run a goal line fade and you put it literally, inches from the ground where Wicks was able to nab it, those are the type of plays that happen. But I thought the way he led things, they kept pretty much, there was, some little things here and there that the offense had to work through, but by and large, when you don't have QB1 out there, I think it was commendable what Clifford did to keep the train on the tracks.
Yeah, well, Clifford admitted to reporters that during the spring and as that mini camp rolled around, he was kind of testing himself in a way to figure out what he can do and what he can't do. He was pushing the limits a little bit in terms of maybe the aggressiveness and whatnot, and that's why we saw some of the interceptions. What I like about Clifford is that it's not like it rattles him. It's not like it completely changes his approach. He knows what he was trying to do. He's learning from that, and the opportunity to run the number 1 offense is important for him. And as he said, this is a you never know business. Nobody is going to want or expect Jordan Love to get hurt during the regular season, but obviously it could happen, and Sean Clifford might need to step in and try to win a game or two for the Packers. As for Love's contract, as I said at the top of the show, it doesn't seem to be something that people are overly concerned about. The goal, the hope was that it would be done before training camp. These things are complicated. These things take time. All of the salary cap ramifications, about how things are structured financially, the timeline, all of that kind of stuff. So what I got from Brian Gutekunst is that while, of course, they wanted to have the contract done, they want to have Jordan Love out there, they understand where he's coming from. Yeah. And quite frankly, if you're Jordan Love, you were here all spring, you were here for mini camp, all during OTAs and everything when you didn't have to be here. He was exercising patience at that point with regard to the contract. Now training camp is here. His only leverage to spur them to get to the finish line is to just say, hey, I'm not going to practice until this thing is done. It's part of the business. It's not ideal. It's not what anybody wants. But I think both sides understand what's going on here, and hopefully, whether it's 24 or 48 or 72 hours from now, this whole contract thing will be done and over with.
Yeah, maybe even by the time the show goes out, you never know.
Yeah,
right?
that is certainly true, because that's the thing with the way the Packers do business, and obviously with now what we're learning, the way Love's camp does business. This is not being negotiated in the media.
No.
There is nothing out there, as far as how this is working or how close they actually are. There are no specifics. So yes, it could happen as soon as we turn off the cameras here, or it could happen a day or two.
I was telling a friend of mine the other day too, because I've been making a lot of inferences in inbox about how, don't confuse silence with stillness. There's things happening, you're just not hearing about it.
Absolutely.
Another line I used on my friend is, there's no Domino's tracker on contracts. It isn't just like, okay, it's ready now. No, it doesn't work like that in this business.
Nobody's got the egg timer running.
No. But seriously, like, think about it. Like Kenny Clark, that's the perfect example of that. He gets the extension on Sunday. I'm in the middle of driving actually to Titletown to grab dinner with some friends, and it's like, oh, Kenny Clark is now extended for 3 more years. And that was a conversation that Kenny said they'd actually been negotiating going all the way back to February at the Combine. There were a few things there. Obviously, Brian Gutekunst said they wanted to get something done, but until it was finally done, that's when we heard about it.
Right.
Same thing with Love. And while you and I don't always talk dollars and cents on this show, Jordan Love is making $11 million this year. That's what this 2-year contract he did, is worth. He had 32 touchdowns at 4,100 yards last season passing. I would say he's worth a little bit more than that. I think everybody appreciates that. And really, when you look at the way quarterback values have gone, and Gutekunst touched on this a little bit, they're aware of the Jared Goff deal. They're aware of the Trevor Lawrence deal. They know in the pantheon of quarterbacks where their guy, who they see as a franchise quarterback, probably fits.
It's all part of the picture.
And you want to take care of it. They've allocated the funds for it, $30 million or whatever it is in salary cap room, despite the fact there's $50 million in dead cap if they were moving forward. The Packers are in a very healthy place financially. It's just making sure that you can find that contracts that make sense for both Love and the Packers. And my hope is, Mike, maybe by the time we get through this week, maybe by the family night, whatever it may be, Love gets the deal done. He's back on the practice field, and the Packers get looking at 2024.
Yeah, I think we're going to be there sooner than later. As far as other day one news on the practice field, on the health front, Zach Tom cleared, or at least partially cleared, from the torn pectoral muscle that kept him all out during the spring. He's back on the practice field on a limited basis. He's not taking 11-on-11 snaps yet, but he was out there for the drills, so that was really good to see. The other torn pectoral, of course, was tight end Tucker Kraft from the spring. He is not quite back yet, but it sounds like it might not be too much longer for him, at least according to Brian Gutekunst. A couple new injuries to some prominent names that popped up that we weren't necessarily aware of. Jaden Reed is currently not practicing because of a toe injury. He called it kind of a freak accident while he was coaching at like a youth football camp. Not something that he's concerned about. Doesn't sound like
that really was it, huh?
What's that?
That was it? That's how that happened?
Yeah.
Because when Brian Gutekunst made a joke about, like, it might have been he was running routes or something with the...
Jaden said something about that he didn't really have like the right footwork, or footwear on, and so that might have contributed to this little problem with his toe. So
get well.
Doesn't sound like anything folks are overly concerned about there. And then rookie 3rd-round draft pick running back Marshawn Lloyd was not on the practice field for day one, listed as having a hip injury. So we'll see what happens there. So that was a bit of news on the health front for the Packers.
Yeah, and I think Lloyd actually talked with reporters in the locker room afterwards too, and mentioned, just something you go through those initial practices, or whatever you want to call them, like when the rookies first report back, the walkthroughs.
Yeah, those early workouts.
It's feeling a little bit of tightness there. Again, hopefully everything can clear up with that. It is what happens, Mike. There's going to be injuries that happen during the offseason training. Certainly a couple things that flared up with the offseason program. It's why you have a 90-man roster. It's why you build build for these sort of things. But I thought what kind of stood out to me was the opportunities it's afforded other guys on this roster. When you look at, outside looking in, the Packers are stacked at receiver. How are they going to allocate all these reps? Well, if there's a day where Jaden Reed isn't out there, that means a little bit more Bo Melton. That means a little bit more, Dontavian Wicks, being able to incorporate some of those guys into things. A.J. Dillon, whom I think I'm going to write a story on later this week, he was the guy taking a bulk of that work behind Josh Jacobs. And then a guy like Ellis Merriweather, who was on the practice squad last year, got a lot of work without Marshawn Lloyd being out there. So
Emmanuel Wilson got his share of snaps in the first practice as well.
Yeah, so that's always the thing. And one of the biggest aspects of this whole thing, when you look at Ben Sims, the amount of work that he got this spring and now into the summer as the number 2 tight end in a lot of those first team offensive, multiple tight end packages. You have to make sure you take advantage of those opportunities when you get them. But the best news of all, to bring this thing full circle, Zach Tom being back, being limited, but on that road back to the football field, the fact that he could have an entire training camp here to rebuild the strength, rebuild the confidence, because I'll tell you what, Mike, what that young man has done in the first 2 seasons of his NFL career and how dynamic he's been at multiple positions, the arrow keeps pointing up for him. And the Packers, he proved last year, a lot of people wrong, that he couldn't play right tackle. He showed he could do it at an extremely high level.
Yeah, I would think that he's going to be back at his right tackle post sooner than later. And however much the Packers want to talk about, finding the best 5 on the offensive line, Zach Tom is one of the best 5 that the Packers have. And as long as he is healthy, he's going to be a big part of things on this offense. With regard to Tom not taking the 11-on-11 snaps, veteran Andre Dillard, the former first-round pick who was brought in as a free agent, he is currently working, or at least in the first practice, he was the guy at right tackle with the first-team offense. A couple other things with regard to the depth chart. We saw Jordan Morgan, the rookie first-round pick out of Arizona, he was rotating at right guard with Sean Ryan with the number 1 offense. So it would appear, at least based on day 1, that Jordan Morgan's best opportunity to win a starting job as a rookie first-round pick, it will be in that competition with Sean Ryan at right guard. So that will definitely be one to keep an eye on. And the other thing that jumps off the practice field when you first see it is the guy who was lined up next to Xavier McKinney at safety with the number 1 defense in the first practice was the rookie second-round pick, Javon Bullard from Georgia.
Yeah, and I remember talking to you in the offseason program thinking, man, will they go the Darnell Savage route of just having Bullard be the guy out there with them all spring? They didn't go that direction. He got some reps with Xavier McKinney, but it was Anthony Johnson Jr. that really took a bulk of those first-team defensive snaps. You had 5-6 weeks to develop these plans. I think that speaks volumes that they gave Bullard that first opportunity on day 1 of training camp. When you look at what his makeup is, what his athletic ceiling is, I think he's a perfect complement to McKinney. And while McKinney is only 24 years old, he's the type of guy that I think you want to have someone like him handling a young rookie in this league with his experience of being a day 1 starter, a guy that had to be wise beyond his years when he went to New York.
Sure.
And I think also with that second-round background, I mean, he knows what it means to be a high safety pick that teams are going to want to build the secondary around. But they're so dang versatile there. I mean, Evan Williams getting a lot of work. Katan Oladipo is still on, the NFI list because of that toe injury he sustained at the combine. But they overseeded the lawn. That's been my big thing all offseason when I talk about that position. And to have that many options, I think it not only enhances the competition, but it gives you a lot to think about in terms of where you want certain guys lined up. Because even if it ends up being Bullard at safety, there's still a lot of flexibility that they can do in terms of how they handle the slot in both the nickel and the dime.
Yeah, and I think Bullard's experience in the slot at Georgia, obviously it's what led to him perhaps being drafted as high as he was, but I think it's going to serve him well as he makes the transition to the NFL as a rookie. I want to get to some other topics that you and I will be watching for and whatnot as training camp unfolds. But first, a little bit of sponsor business. Sirius XM NFL Radio delivers hard-hitting analysis and up-to-the-minute NFL news that true football fanatics need 24/7, 365. And at Cousin Subs, we have something for everyone, like our Wisconsin cheese curds, mac and cheese, golden fries, and creamy shakes, all paired with your favorite sub or sub-in-a-bowl. Cousin Subs, 50-plus years of better. All right. We're just going to go back and forth here a little bit, Wes. I'm going to let you take the first one, then I'm going to come back with another one, and we'll go back and forth until we run out of topics. But under the umbrella of what are you watching for, whether that be position battles, whether that be certain details, whether that be specific players, what's at the top of your list other than some of the things we've already talked about?
It's an excellent question. I mean, one of the things that I think yesterday in particular that I was looking at was the defensive line, and Brian talked about it at the podium, and he feels like it's not just about, okay, well, these are our defensive tackles, these are our defensive ends. It's about how that group expanded now under Jason Rebrovich can really round itself out to whether any injuries that could happen, any type of issues that flare up. They have the type of depth there that it's as he said, it's the deepest they've been in a long time, but it's as versatile as they've ever been. And to be able to have guys like Colby Wooden, Lucas Van Ness, Rashawn Gary, players that can play multiple positions in that front, I think is going to be so key. And honestly, like, once we're a week away from the pads going on, so we still got to get through some of this ramp up period, this acclimation period, to really see what these guys look like. But my goodness, Mike, just watching how the defensive line, the defensive front was getting off the ball in the offseason program in some of the team periods. I mean, you can tell the swagger that has been infused into that group because
they're being trained in a different way,
quite
frankly, in terms of, as you say, the getting off the ball, because this is an up the field attacking front as opposed to a read and react. So they're being trained to play a different way.
And I did like what Brian said. I mean, he's probably the first person that's acknowledged, like, okay, there are some drawbacks to this.
Exactly. It's like if there weren't, everybody would play this way, right? So I mean, you have to learn how to play. Yeah. You have to learn how to play that aggressive style without making yourself too vulnerable in other places. That's where the transition really comes in.
But it's about turning up the heat on the quarterback. It's about reducing the amount of time that he's back there to make decisions, and ultimately the hope is that type of pressure is what also helps you generate more takeaways. And that was the number one thing that had to change from last year. You can boil it down, you can blame this, that, and the other thing, but the Packers did not have enough interceptions last year. They did not take the football away enough last year, and the way that defense was playing, the way it was set up, the philosophy behind it, it just wasn't conducive to having success. This Jeff Hafley defense, especially with his background as a secondary coach, I think that's going to be the real true litmus test of this thing. I've said it once, I'll say it 1,000 times. I don't care about top 1, top 5, top 10, wherever you finish ranking. It's about how you feel when your defense is on the field.
Yeah.
And it could be, I've said this to you before, 2014. Packers ranked 15th in total defense by the end of the year. But the second half of that season was a much different picture than they painted in the first half.
Yeah, when you talk about turnovers, all you have to do is look at the 2 playoff games last January, right? The Packers get the interception from Alexander, the pick 6 from Savage.
Yes.
And they go on to a blowout in Dallas. What do they do in San Francisco? They drop multiple interception opportunities, and the game gets away in the final minutes, and your season is over. So there is no overstating the value of generating those turnovers and what this new defensive staff is after.
So what I'm looking for in these practices, what I looked for yesterday, especially once those pads go on, watching these bulls go to work, watching them go up against this offensive line, because that approach too, I think, is only going to make the Packers O-line better.
And I think that's going to get much, much more interesting when the pads go on in a few days, certainly. 2 of the things that I'll throw out right now that I'm definitely watching for, and this is going to be ongoing throughout all of training camp. It's that battle between Eric Stokes and Carrington Valentine for who is going to be the starting corner in the base defense opposite Jair Alexander. We're already seeing them rotating. They were rotating during the spring. This is a competition that is far from over. Somebody's going to win that job. Somebody's not. But the Packers feel good, obviously, about their depth at cornerback. And then the other ongoing competition, of course, is going to be at kicker.
Yeah.
There are 3 still in the competition, with James Turner being claimed off waivers at the end of minicamp. So Anders Carlson, Greg Joseph, James Turner all in the mix. We saw Turner. He went 4 out of 6 on field goals as the day 1 kicker in training camp. I'm sure we're going to see the other guys, if not as soon as today, certainly in the coming days. So those are 2 competitions that, quite frankly, could go all the way up until the passports are being checked for Brazil, quite
Yeah.
frankly. That those competitions might not be decided for quite a while.
In the fact, looking specifically at those cornerbacks, they're going to need both of those guys. And Brian Gutekunst said as much as it relates to Eric Stokes and making sure he can put those hamstring issues behind him. We've seen it, Mike. We know. And I think when you look at, in terms of the proven depth, cornerback is not one of the Packers' deeper ones right now. I mean, they have Corey Ballantyne, although he's currently out right now with the hamstring injury. He's sort of the backup right now to Keyshawn Nixon in the slot. But they need Jair Alexander. They need Carrington Valentine. They need Eric Stokes. There was a reason why they waited until the 7th round to draft Kalen King. They felt good about what they had, but also it sometimes is how this board falls. So whether it is Valentine or Stokes that prevails or however they go about handling it, I think those two guys throughout the course of a 17-game season are going to be pivotal to what Green Bay wants to accomplish.
Yeah. Anything else near the top of your list?
I think when the position battles all shuffle out, I think what really surprises me the most, I think, and I feel like I've said this in the past, but it really truly feels more than any other year, the difference between being on the roster and potentially starting at a lot of these positions is so thin. And I think about it, obviously receiver's the one that'll jump off to the page to a lot of people, but Packers have multiple offensive linemen. I mean, guys like Royce Newman, guys that have been in this thing for a long time that are competing for spots. And that's going to be something I think that really drives them going forward. Inside linebacker, I mean, Eric Wilson and Isaiah McDuffie, they're holding their own trying to stay in that base defense. Edgerrin Cooper trying to weave his way into that as well.
That was the next thing on my list was if and when are we going to see Edgerrin Cooper make his way into the first team defense, or are Isaiah McDuffie and Eric Wilson gonna hold him off? I think it's I know it's the 4-3. It's really more about the first two inside linebackers because I don't know how often that third one is going to be on the field, but we'll see what happens with Cooper. Isaiah McDuffie's knowledge of Hafley's scheme and having the connection there, obviously, in their past at Boston College. That seems to be going a long way right now for Isaiah McDuffie, so it's going to be interesting to see just when, where, and how Edgerrin Cooper kind of breaks through because the Packers drafted him in the 2nd round to be a big part of it.
Oh, 100%.
Everybody knows that.
And athletically, he's just different from everybody. But you have to weigh that out where you have a guy like Edgerrin Cooper that's played as much college football as he's played. You have someone like Eric Wilson, who has been in the league now for 7 years.
Right.
And while it's been predominantly on special teams in Green Bay, he's a guy that's had 130 tackles in this league. So that's where it gets really interesting to me, and where these position battles could potentially shuffle out, and seeing that every guy the Packers re-signed, there was a reason behind it. It wasn't just Richard Bisaccia's special teams. They wanted to give them a chance to compete on defense, and right now they're doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we got to get rolling because there's another practice waiting for us. So with that, we're going to sign off on this edition of Packers Unscripted. Be sure to follow all of our coverage of training camp. We will have new, fresh stuff on the site on Packers.com for you every single day, and we will be continuing with 2 shows of Packers Unscripted per week, most of the time on Tuesdays and Thursdays, unless something gets in the way. But we're going to try to stick to that as best we can. So for Wes, I am Mike. Thank you for tuning in, everybody, and we will see you next time.